We all know 2020 did not go according to plan. The plan had been to train a group of teenagers as canoeing instructors, assist them with wilderness first aid training, and accompany them on some canoe trips as they learned to lead others. That was all put on hold. All people in Ontario, where I live, were ordered to stay home because COVID-19 was spreading. It was a pandemic, and no vaccines or treatments were known. We were only allowed to go out to buy food, medicine, and other essentials, or to go to medical care. Everything else was closed beginning mid-March. We were expected to stay in our houses or yards and stay away from other people. This continued into May. We chose to leave the snow tires on the car because we were not driving enough to bother changing them to summer tires. It was not essential. The snow melted in the yard, and it was looking like it was time to go camping. What to do? Well, our yard makes a pretty good campsite in the city, so we put up the tent in the yard, cleaned the picnic table, cooked on the barbecue, and prepared to make the best of it. The s'mores were made in the fireplace. A few weeks later, we heard that the government would begin to open Ontario provincial parks on June 1st. My husband told me I needed to go paddling with friends or I would go crazy staying in the house. A day trip was arranged for June 1st. It was difficult to contain the excitement. You can see a few of the paddlers here. We decided we would begin at Acre in Algonquin Park. We made a detailed plan, decided on a meeting spot, and then changed our plan to go to the Barron Canyon at the last minute because of strong winds. On every trip, we always arranged a guardian angel who was not with us, but who knew where we were and the details about our trip. If something went wrong, we could communicate with this person and they would get us help. Because of the pandemic, we could not share vehicles with those in different households. We would need to do a return trip or loop instead of using a car shuttle. We would not share food, and we would stay 2 meters apart at all times. We would not touch the belongings of others. We watched the park staff, who did not know how to register people that first day. We used a self-serve kiosk, usually intended for when the park staff members were absent. Would this be the only trip of the season? We didn't know, but we took along our cameras so we could remember it. We put in at Squirrel Rapids. The temperature was a chilly 5 degrees Celsius and we were in wetsuits. The Cache Rapids 400-meter portage was completely blocked with trees at the put-in. This didn't dampen our enthusiasm, but it did make us work harder. By the time we had that behind us, we were hungry and ate lunch on the water. We should have been cold, but we were hot. So we started stripping off layers of clothing. We stopped to watch a beautiful indigenous Algonquin hoop dancer and enjoyed the whole canyon section with its very steep walls. We spotted turtles and deer. At the next portage, we could have walked up to see Brigham shoot, but we didn't. We headed back the way we had come. We stopped at a campsite for a campfire and marshmallows. Bubbles were blown. We headed back over the 400-meter portage. On our return, I distinctly remember carrying the canoe to the end of the portage and being unable to find a spot to put it down due to the many trees in the way. I'm afraid the canoe got a few hard knocks as I tossed it on the trees. It was my own canoe, so I'd have to fix it if I messed it up. There were a few black flies and mosquitoes. The scenery was beautiful. I wrote up our story and posted it online with some photos. We hoped it would encourage others and cheer up those who were stuck at home. We did more trips. We returned to the Barron in the fall and saw the beautiful colors of the leaves. We found the trees blocking the portage gone, making the portage a breeze. We also walked up to see Brigham shoot and spotted a great blue heron. For something different, we tried paddling down the canyon backwards in perfectly straight lines. Now some of you would say, why? When you paddle a lot, you find unique ways to do things. I ask you, why not? This was to become a theme of the year 2020. On this trip, a cute little Coca-Cola polar bear cub made a surprise appearance as a birthday gift. He rode up front for all to see. A special treat. We often had stuffed furry friends along. Here are our usual 3 bears. You will recognize 2 of them, and the third is Nanook. If we needed to teach you about bear safety in the wilderness, we would call on Safety Bear, who was ready to go with his whistle, air horn, bear spray, and bear bangers. We did not walk the short trail above Barron Canyon this year, but we've done it before, and it is highly recommended. You can look down on the river from the cliffs above. As the season progressed, we added to our adventures, paddling over 40 day trips near home with a paddling distance of more than 600 kilometers. Typically, we paddled 15 to 20 kilometers each day. Drives were generally less than 90 minutes each way. As the days became shorter, the paddling time was reduced and the distances too. We did not paddle through rapids on any of the trips. We saw some rapids and did experience strong currents. Though I'd paddled in many places across Canada, I'd not paddled most of these local places before. I'll tell you about some of them, what I liked and didn't, and show you how you can paddle there too. So that there is no need to scribble down the details, I encourage you to access the details, some warnings, and resources to do your own research on these trips here. Our next adventure was to Crotch Lake, North Frontenac Parklands. We had not been there before, but quickly fell in love with the wilderness setting and ended up going 4 times, covering all seasons except winter. It was always wonderful. We stopped to check many campsites. They were all good. The campsites were well maintained and had many excellent views. Crotch is a large lake and can have dangerous waves and wind. The name Stormy Point is there for a reason. We always went on a very calm day and paddled near shore. We tried using the North Frontenac Parklands South Access Road for a put-in, but soon preferred to pre-arrange our parking in the boat trailer lot at Tumble Home Lodge nearby. Rarely we'd see a motorboat or someone fishing. There were lots of good swimming spots, lots of swimming, and lots of spots where you could dry on the rocks in the sunshine. We usually had a campfire with s'mores and always blew some bubbles. We explored a possible portage across the peninsula for Stormy Point, but it was unmaintained and blocked by debris. We spotted lots of loons, a deer, and a great blue heron. Once, when the weather report anticipated calm weather 2 days in a row, we made a last-minute decision to stay over. Our only overnight of the year. As everyone knows, you should always put up your tent to check things before you head into the backcountry. I checked the tent enough to know that I had all of the pieces, but I didn't put it up. When we tried to put it up in the backcountry at Crotch Lake, we found that the shock cord no longer stretched like elastic and the poles would not stay together. We had our usual duct tape along, and we nicely duct taped our poles so the tent could go up. Lesson learned. It was a beautiful, calm 2 days. Though I had heard that things could look different with different water levels, I'd never seen it so evident as at Crotch Lake, where the water gets lowered many feet after Thanksgiving. The fall colors here were bright. If you arrived at Crotch Lake and found the campsites booked, you could still stop for lunch at an unoccupied large rock island. There are options. From here on, I will tell you about our adventures in a logical geographical order and not the actual order we did them. Our trips expanded to include up to 10 people, but were often small groups and a few were solo trips. Some involved canoe club members and some did not. I did not lead them all, but I was increasingly assisting with leadership. When we went to Kashwakamak Lake, North Frontenac Parklands, in August, none of us had been there before. We took a look and found excellent, well-maintained campsites. There were cottages along one side of the lake, while the other side seemed more like wilderness. We saw a few motorboats. We had a solo canoe with us, and we headed to campsite 16 on an island for our lunch. We intended to paddle to the north end of the lake, but the wind might cause issues on our return, so we changed our plan and paddled south. We island hopped across the lake, reaching Ichthus Island. It was hot, so we had a good swim there before we are heading home. We visited Canonto and Palmerston lakes in the middle of November. As I loaded my canoe at 7 a.m., my neighbor was jealous. He joked that we would soon need a fork for the ice instead of a paddle. We'd not been there before, and the roads were paved. We parked at the South Clyde River launch on Canonto Lake. There is almost no room to park, but thankfully, this was not the busy season. It was just above freezing, with clouds, and we were expecting rain and winds later. We lost no time getting going. We were in our wetsuits just in case, and we stayed near shore. The lake was shallow with stumps, logs, and rocks, other hazards just under the surface. Our map showed their locations. The wind pushed us along. There were two large islands, Russell and Arcole, in the middle. We saw a cottage that looked like it was falling into the lake. The north side of Canonto has a few cottages, but mostly it looks wild. There are some huge rock cliffs. The south side of Canonto has more cottages. They were well spaced. We only saw one other boat, driven by someone in bright orange. It was hunting season. A stream flows into the lake at the west end. There are rocks blocking your path, and you will not be able to paddle farther. There is an unmarked, mostly level, maintained portage on the north side, which is about 120 meters and takes you to Palmerston Lake. You will find a large parking area with a launch to Palmerston Lake. This is where I would recommend that you park. On our paddle back to our launch, the wind had switched directions and was again pushing us along. We got off the water as the winds became strong, and we headed to the portage area to explore more on land. The area had belonged to the Cartwright family, who allowed people to use the portage. It is now called Palmerston Canonto Conservation Area, and it is maintained by North Frontenac Parklands and local volunteers. It is an amazing spot, and I highly recommend it. The trails were clearly marked. You should see the Lakeview Lookout with views of the lakes below and a picnic table for a snack. It looks like you're on the top of the world. Take the Blue Crow Trail and the Blue and Orange Trillium Trail to get there. It is less than a kilometer, but you are climbing up a large hill. The nearby Waits Public Beach has a big beach for swimming, picnic tables, parking, and a dock into Palmerston Lake. You could also park here. Next, we explored the west end of Palmerston Lake. We met some folks who were former neighbors 40 years ago. They offered us their yard for camping. The Palmerston campground has space for trailers and in non-pandemic times may allow tents. The Double S Sports and Marina, also at the west end of Palmerston Lake, looks like a good lunch spot. And it offers ice cream. It's in a very pretty sheltered bay. I believe by parking between the lakes, avid paddlers could explore both lakes on a good day, even if you can't get a campsite. It would be better to stay overnight somewhere if you can. We visited the picnic area on Silver Lake, just west of Silver Lake Provincial Park on Highway 7. We launched and took a short paddle around the lake. We could have had a picnic at the launch or at the Provincial Park. The park had 2 beaches, picnic tables, and a playground. The east end of the lake had more cottages, camps, and houses, while the west end looked more like wilderness. This is a great, short, and fun trip for families. Mid-November, I took a solo trip to Calabogie Lake. This would be a good time to tell you I love the Garmin InReach satellite communication device. Without it, I would not be paddling solo. Using it, I can send a text message from anywhere. When plans change, my guardian angel can find me because it continually tracks my location and puts it on a map that others can see. The device cost about $300 5 years ago. There is a usage fee, but it can be turned on and off. You only pay if you are using it. You will see many of our InReach maps in this presentation. I drove first to Barnett Park on Calabogie Road, also called 508. This was a beautiful park with a beach, shelters, docks, parking, a launch, and a playground. There is a fee to park here. Next, I drove to the Calabogie Visitor Center on 511 near the edge of the town of Calabogie. Here I could park for free, and I found another suitable launch for canoes and kayaks. This lake has several dams, which are dangerous for canoes. There was a dam to the right, so I paddled left. I headed away from town and out along the causeway. There was a break in the causeway, so I paddled through and into Grassy Bay. This had a few houses. Mostly it looked marshy, with lots of tall grasses, cattails, wild rice, stumps, and a few trees. The bay is sheltered from the wind, but the wind also stopped blowing. The sun came out, and there were clear reflections everywhere. Just before sunset, I paddled back to my car. I watched the beautiful sunset around 4 p.m. If I returned on a calm day, I'd park at the visitor center, paddle Grassy Bay, and head to Barnett Park for lunch, not far away. I'd also recommend the view from Eagle's Nest Trail or Manitou Mountain Trail if you like hiking. However, if the parking area is full, do not park on the road or they may tow you away. Mid-September, we visited Burnstown Beach. We had heard it was crowded on summer weekends. There were no crowds on a weekday. We headed south on the Madawaska River and to the right from the beach. We saw some houses or cottages, mostly on the west side. We saw rolling hills on both sides of the river. We had a headwind of about 35 kilometers an hour and also fought the current as far as the Springtown Bridge. Some experience paddling in current is required at this location. We had strong paddlers, or we would not have succeeded. We turned around at the bridge and enjoyed a tailwind and the current, pushing us back to our lunch stop at Kippens Creek. What do we do if a person forgets their lunch in a pandemic? We found out. Along shore, we found white turtlehead flowers and lots of chanterelle mushrooms. We paddled up the creek and found 2 culverts. Here we go again. Why would someone paddle through a culvert? I say, why not? In the canoe, we passed through with an inch or 2 to spare, and we continued on to the end of the creek. It was very pretty. The kayakers with us could not pass through and had to settle for photos we had taken. This trip represented the ideal cooperative effort. Though I was the official trip leader, another person who had more knowledge of the route led on the water. Our botanist gave us a bit of an education while we were there. When multi-talented punster wasn't telling us puns to make us laugh or groan, he was spending time trying to move our photos from a cell phone to a computer. It was a real team effort. We will move on to discuss our many trips in various spots along the Rideau River. Though we had not been to many of these places, we had found the Watson paddling guides free online to be excellent. Even during pandemic times, Parks Canada staff at the lock stations would answer questions and were always helpful. Most of you will know that the Rideau Canal system was created between 1826 and 1832 as a defense system for Canada. It has continued to operate since that time and is now used for recreation. You can see Canada's history as you paddle along it. We will begin in downtown Ottawa and head towards Kingston. The river flows towards Ottawa. At Dow's Lake, we found a large lake with parking and boat rentals right at the pavilion. That is great if you don't own your own boat. If you have children, you might prefer Mooney's Bay with a huge beach, a supervised swimming area, and a playground, but no boat rentals. My favorites are Black Rapids Lock Station, Ecolands Park, and Chapman Mills Conservation Area because they're nearby. All have docks and nice green space. Do you have access points near you? Check them out. There are many good ones. Next, we come to Manotick, where we had several trips to and from cars. We took the wind and the current into account. We would always want the harder paddle in the morning and the easier return. Sometimes the wind would change just before our departure, and we would begin at the other end of our journey. On one October trip, the geese were in the process of flying south, and they were everywhere. We would paddle through them, and they would take off in a frenzy. We noticed a plane on the river, taxiing away from us. Some of our group wanted to go out into the middle of the river to see it take off. I suggested that the plane would likely take off into the wind, which would mean it would come back towards us, and we did not want to be in the middle of the river. A few minutes later, the plane came towards us and left the water just before reaching us. Lesson learned. Beware of seaplanes taking off. We found Kelly's Landing to be a good ice cream stop on these journeys, and it could also provide a full meal if you wanted one. At Cars, we explored Stevens Creek a couple of times as far as the 416 highway, where the creek was blocked. We saw a turtle, red-winged blackbirds, a great blue heron, mallard ducks, many Canadian geese, water lilies, and cattails, right beside a farmer's cornfield. The W.A. Taylor Conservation Area was a nice stop for lunch. Sometimes we also ate at the Cars Recreation Area. We explored Cranberry Creek nearby. Several times we visited Rideau River Provincial Park. Nearby are the Reeve Craig Free Public Boat Launch, Kemptville Creek, Anniversary Park, and the Ferguson Forest Trails. In Kemptville, we walked the Turtle Trail and the Kinder Trail for little children. At the Provincial Park, we walked the Shoreline Trail. All were excellent. Mid-June, we launched from the Reeve Craig launch on Green Line Road. It was a hot, sunny day, and we had to use a variety of cooling techniques. The kayaks did regular rolls. In our canoe, we had ice cubes in the cooler. They were regularly placed inside of clothing, where they were allowed to melt. We also used a spray bottle of cold, clean water. When we returned to the cars, I took my cell phone out of my barrel, which had been in the sun all day. It was so hot that it would not work. That was a new one for me. My first trip to Burritts Rapids was in October, but I keep going back. It's beautiful. We've paddled between Burritts and Nicholson locks and walked up to the upper Nicholson waterfall. We loved the 4-kilometer tip-to-tip trail at Burritts Lock Station and the heritage buildings along the way. The weirs, dams, and waterfalls add variety, and there are pretty scenes with picnic tables to be enjoyed year-round. We've now spotted ice fishing and skating there. Between Kilmarnock and Merrickville Beach, we found a wide, marshy area and the Rideau Bird Sanctuary. We saw a great blue heron and beautiful clouds in the sky reflected by the water. On an Arctic expedition there, late fall, we had cold water and cold air and dressed accordingly. Wetsuits and layers for all. The most exciting part was a visit to Stella Luna's in Merrickville afterwards for hot drinks. They were required to warm us up. The Rideau between Poonamalie and Lower Beveridge Lock Station is quite shallow. The land was flooded after the dam was built at Poonamalie. Stumps and rocks can stick up, so there is an advantage to staying near the channel marked by buoys. Though there used to be a shortcut for paddlers, called the Mud Cut, it is no longer maintained, and it is now gone. We saw gulls, geese, ducks, a cormorant, and a muskrat. We noted a couple of parked float planes and remembered our last experience with the one taking off over our heads. The Tay Canal was built after the Rideau Canal to connect Perth to the Rideau for transportation purposes. It was not made as deep as the Rideau, and it tends to be shallow. If you stick to the channel marked by buoys, you can pass through in a canoe or kayak. In spring, the water level gets higher, and you will have fewer difficulties. We explored the Perth Wildlife Preserve and climbed the tower to look out over the marsh. We saw lots of water lilies and cattails, as well as great blue herons, loons, and a beaver. We spotted black rat snakes on land. When going east, the water splits between the river and the canal near Upper Beveridge Lock Station. The river has a big stop sign telling boats to stay away. Take the other channel with the buoys on the right to get to Upper Beveridge Lock Station. We visited Burfee's Point Provincial Park in July. From the main boat launch, we paddled east and north along Big Rideau Lake's open water, then west and south into Nobles Bay. After lunch on a beautiful island and a swim at a deserted Nobles Bay beach, we portaged past the park store and into Loon Lake. We took photos of loons for a while and saw a huge beaver lodge. No other boats were there. Another short, level, well-maintained portage brought us to Hog Bay. We could see the large crowded beach and many campers packed together. We left them and headed back to our lunch, completing a short loop of about 8 kilometers. The paddle-in campsites were all closed this summer, but we took a peek and they were all good. We saw lots of deer. This is a beautiful wilderness place on a calm day. The area around the provincial park has many cottages and does not look so much like wilderness. Winds and waves could be hazardous on the big open lake. Another year, we could paddle south in Hog Bay to see where Black Creek enters and to see McFarlane House. We did not get there this year. Our first trip from Chaffeys to Jones Falls Lock Station happened on a hot, windy day. Our first problem was that there were very few parking spots at Chaffeys, and with the pandemic, we were all in separate cars. The lockmaster gave us permission to park on a field near the museum. The lakes looked clear and welcoming. Some went swimming 3 times to get cooled off before the day was over. Some had ice cubes in a cooler and a spray bottle of cold water again. Bubbles were blown. We saw ospreys and their nest, a muskrat, belted kingfishers, ravens, and loons. The Cataraqui Trail runs parallel to Chaffeys Locks Road here. These, together with Indian Lake Road and Marina Road, form a 6-kilometer loop extension of the Rideau Trail called the Blue Loop, which has nice scenery if you want a pretty and short hike. The view into Indian Lake looked inviting. It's on the bucket list for paddling next season. During one winter hike, we heard and spotted several trumpeter swans at Chaffeys. They were loud. That ends our tour of the Rideau River waterway, where we enjoyed much of 2020. Nearby Charleston Lake Provincial Park was one of many canoe hike combo trips. We combined those who wanted to hike and those who wanted to paddle in one location. The hike was to Tallow Rock Bay. The paddle started at Boathouse Cove, went past Buckhorn, across Runnings Bay, along the mouth of Slim Bay, north and west, before arriving at Tallow Rock Bay. Upon arrival, we were able to determine that our hiker had already arrived and left the beach at Tallow Rock Bay. We explored around a few of the islands and checked out many of the paddle-in campsites before arriving back at Slim Bay for lunch. It was very scenic. Since we had no portages, we brought huge lawn chairs and were comfortably eating when our hiker spotted us and took this photo. We explored a few more places before heading back to Boathouse Cove to meet up. We would have liked to hike the Blue Mountain Trail, but there wasn't time. The trail starts from Huckleberry Hollow north of the Tall Pines Cabin and Dock. Next summer. Together again, we hiked along the Shoreline Trail. We thought the views overlooking Runnings Bay were the prettiest, but everything was picturesque. It's highly recommended. On Canada Day, we joined the crowds at Morris Island Conservation Area on the Ottawa River. This was a beautiful scenic spot. We blew bubbles with some children who were doing the same. The wind was strong enough that it could blow the bubbles without us helping at all. We returned here several times, and it always seemed to be quite busy, except in the winter. Beware that there can be dangerous currents and fluctuations in the water level here due to the dam, the Mississippi River entering, and other things. Paddlers are asked to stay within the conservation area buoys. I'd recommend walking the Voyageur and the Miners Trails, which have nice views. We visited the Ottawa River at Shirleys Bay. It is possible to paddle upstream 8 kilometers to the left to Pinheys Point, but we did not get there this season. We visited the Ottawa River at Dick Bell Park. Head right for a short paddle downstream to Britannia Park. It has a beautiful beach families will love. We did not do this paddle this season. Beware that Deschines Rapids are just past Britannia Bay. Stay away from those. You will also have to deal with the current on the Ottawa River. If in doubt, begin at Britannia Park and go upstream first. Our first trip to paddle the Mississippi River between Pakenham and Blakeney Rapids was in September, but we would come again. It was quite beautiful. Beginning at the Pakenham beach, we paddled south or to the right at the beach towards Blakeney Rapids. At Blakeney, it was sometimes crowded, but later in the year, we had the place to ourselves. There are lots of rapids, little bridges, benches, picnic tables, trails, and a fire pit in the area at Blakeney Rapids. It took us a few trips to see them all, and it was very enjoyable. We always took a small side paddle up through a culvert and into a creek on our way back to Pakenham. There was optional ice cream at Scoops on Waba Road. We stopped to see the rapids in Pakenham at the 5-span bridge from land. Swimming is not recommended, and several people have drowned here. We didn't paddle Mississippi Lake this season, but we've enjoyed it other years. You can launch from Riverside Park in Carleton Place. Head left to get out of town. There is a dam to the right that you would want to avoid. If you are out for a long paddle, you may get as far as the Mississippi Lake Bird Sanctuary and the Mississippi Lake National Wildlife Area, with a launch spot at the end of the lake. When shuttles are possible, this would make a good one-way trip. Expect lots of homes and cottages. We took a trip to the south end of White Lake to visit friends on 3 Mile Bay. We arrived early at the small launch off of Wabalek Side Road and enjoyed the calm water paddling 8 kilometers before lunch. It was hot and a good day for swimming. There were a few Crown Land islands that could be used for a lunch stop if you needed them. We didn't. There were no motorboats in the morning, but by afternoon, some parts of the lake were rough because there were lots of boats zigzagging across the water. We saw 4 sets of loons and a great blue heron. We saw a few loons trying to avoid being run over. When we arrived back at the launch, the parking area was full, and 3 motorboats were lined up to exit. We were glad that we could exit without using the official launch. You can also access White Lake at the Waba Museum on the north end of the lake. The drive is shorter, and there is more parking, but there are also more cottages and more motorboats. The south end is quieter. Mid-October, Canoe Club members headed to the South Nation River, beginning at the end of La Croix Road near Castleman. It was cool, overcast, damp, and windy. We were dressed in many layers, but quickly found we were getting hot and took some layers off. The river was wide and shallow, meandering back and forth. The banks were made of clay and could be slippery. First, we headed south towards Castleman, and after 4 kilometers came to rapids. Punster tried a new way of paddling, lying horizontally on top of the canoe, to paddle with a kayak paddle. When he got tired, he tried using the paddle as a pillow. Why not? After exploring the rapids a bit, we headed back to the launch for lunch and continued downstream afterwards. We saw lots of birds, a great blue heron, and several beaver dams. We came to a spot where, years ago, the clay banks had fallen into the river, forming a landslide. We could see La Rose Forest ahead, but we were concerned about the challenging wind on our return, so we headed back to the launch. In good weather, we could paddle quite a long way north here. During the pandemic, travel to Quebec was sometimes discouraged and sometimes forbidden. As a result, we did not go to all of our usual paddling spots in Quebec. We did paddle the Gatineau River near Wakefield. We didn't go to Meech Lake, which is scenic and wild. We didn't go to Lac Philippe or Lac Limy, which are well set up for families and have boat rentals. All are recommended if regulations permit. On a Saturday in August, Canoe Club members enjoyed canoeing and kayaking on Lac la Peche in Gatineau Park, Quebec. We were delayed a bit by the mix-up with the starting location. When we got to the parking area at 11 a.m., it was packed, and the beach had people everywhere. I was glad I had a canoe. It was a hot summer day, and there were plenty of quiet places for a swim once we were away from the crowds. We saw loons, a turkey vulture, water lilies, and cardinal flowers in bloom. Because it was so hot, we decided this was the perfect time to test the buoyancy of our newly acquired refurbished canoe. In 2019, a keen club kayak instructor had taken the time to patiently teach our group of flatwater canoeists how to roll a canoe. Just in case you need to know, this is how you do it.
Well, now we're going to see.
Good luck.
Works.
Ready?
Ready?
Why not, right? There were cooling benefits to rolling around and around and around to give the canoe a good workout. And the results were? The flotation chamber at one end of the refurbished canoe had a tiny leak that would need to be repaired. And we were all feeling nice and cool. In mid-September, we headed to Lac Sainte-Marie, Quebec. En route, we stopped to buy the traditional raspberry pie in Ferrelton, the best raspberry pie anywhere. We did not expect the 20-kilometer-an-hour wind, and we found it challenging for our solo canoe. There were quite a few houses or cottages on Lac Sainte-Marie, but there were very few once we left the lake and headed south on the Gatineau River and towards Low. The area was very scenic. After 6 kilometers, we decided to turn around because of the wind and head north on the Gatineau River. We spotted a tree that had nearly been eaten through by a beaver, but was still standing. My camera refused to work, so Punster gave me a lesson on taking photos using my cell phone. He also collected trash we found along the way and deposited it in a dumpster at Lac Sainte-Marie when the day was over. We watched a beautiful sunset as we drove to Ottawa. Several times we visited Gracefield Christian Camp near Gracefield, Quebec. We paddled the circumference of Lac Castor Blanc and found it to be about 12 kilometers. Favorite paddles here include to Turtle Rock, Second Beach, the Trans-Canada Trail Gazebo, or Bruno's. Because this is a familiar spot, we were tempted to paddle up the creek at the north end of the lake and under the Trans-Canada Trail. It is shallow, but in some water levels you can explore for quite a while after the trail crossing. Other times you cannot make it under the Trans-Canada Trail. The paved trail is for biking or walking and runs between Gracefield and Lac Blue Sea. The camp has paddle-in campsites, regular campsites, cabins, a supervised beach, a playground, trails, canoe rentals, and many other activities families will like. It can be used by the public. Call ahead if you want to go. As fall headed towards winter, the car had been driven 10,000 kilometers and still had the snow tires on. They had never been removed. Some of our usual paddling spots had no water. Some parts of the Rideau Canal were drained. Some places only had ice. We got creative. We were paddling on the Ottawa River because it had liquid water. It should be noted that this is a big river with a big current. There are also significant risks from the cold water and the cold air. Do not paddle in these conditions unless you are in a well-trained group and have all the required hypothermia gear. We were wearing wetsuits. Dry suits are even better. We always stay near shore in cold water and, of course, have those PFDs on. Mid-November, we paddled between the end of Blair Road and downtown. I started to understand how Rockcliffe got its name when I saw the many high cliffs of sedimentary rock along the river. We saw many boating clubs right downtown along the river. The land must be very expensive there, but they have been there for years. We watched the mist above 3 waterfalls where the Rideau River enters the Ottawa River. The currents here were strong, and we were glad that we had some whitewater training. We also saw the Rideau locks before spotting the Parliament buildings and many other downtown places we could recognize. The old buildings seemed to face the water. This was a surprise to me. Of course, they were built when the Ottawa River was the main way of getting around. After lunch, we headed back. Another day, we paddled the Ottawa River between Petrie Island and Lower Duck Island. We almost got to Blair Road, where we'd paddled before. On this day, it was 2 degrees Celsius and cloudy. There was snow on the ground. The launch we wanted to use was frozen, so we launched on the east side of Petrie Island and then paddled upstream through a culvert to head west. The strong westerly wind and the current were challenging, and we were cold despite all of the correct things we were wearing. We had on winter coats and hats. We did not expect that wind. Within an hour, the wind dropped away. We saw walking paths, trees, long grass, and a few bulrushes. We stopped in a park near Greens Creek for lunch. Now it was sunny and the wind stopped completely. We warmed up. After lunch, we headed back towards Petrie Island and watched a beautiful sunset at 4 p.m. On December 10th, it was minus 2 degrees Celsius, and there was a wind of 20 kilometers an hour that was not expected. When we arrived at the Manotick launch on the Rideau River, we saw that the snowplows and the salt trucks were working on the icy roads. The usual launch was surrounded by thick ice, and it was not breaking. We were able to launch a short distance away. We explored the side channel towards Watson's Mill, but we were stopped by solid ice surrounding our canoe. We decided against continuing, in favor of keeping the canoe in one piece. We headed toward cars. The sun, though expected, only peeked out for a few minutes. 2 pair of expedition socks were not enough. We used chemical warmers to warm our hands and our feet. We drank hot water. We were still cold. We could tell our season was about to end. After 4 hours and 16 kilometers, we headed home to get warm. The car's heater was set to high. The next day, December 11th, we intended to paddle from the end of Blair Road along the Ottawa River. We found that the launch site and the parking was barricaded, and it was not safe to go that way. Instead, we changed our plan and drove to Petrie Island again. This time, we decided to paddle east on the Ottawa River towards Cumberland. We donned Santa hats for what we expected would be our last paddle of 2020. Strangers stopped to talk. Others took photos of us. Someone gave us Christmas ornaments to put on our trees. Neither of us had looked at a map going in this direction, but we headed off, staying close to shore in our cold water immersion gear. We knew our InReach device would show our guardian angel where we were on a map. Icicles were growing upwards from the waterline. Each piece of grass was encased in 1 inch of ice. The river here runs along the 174 highway, and the trucks honked at us. When we came to the 3 ferries crossing over the river at Cumberland, we had to time our paddling carefully to avoid getting run over by them. One lady who lived along the river all of her life came out to chat. She said we reminded her of the voyageurs who would return home late in the season. She told us about the Ottawa River's history and how the frogs had disappeared after sewage was put into the river. I could have listened to her all day. We eventually turned around and headed to Barnett Park for lunch. We climbed to the top of the hill to see the view of the river. Drinking hot water and using battery-powered hand warmers, we tried to warm up. Afterwards, we hopped back into our canoe and we went back to Petrie Island. The wind had stopped and the river reflected everything. We were cold, but not frozen. Upon arriving home, we found 2 photos sent by a stranger we'd met in the morning. He was now a new friend and said he would be out paddling with us next spring. It was the last paddle of 2020, a wonderful way to end our year. I was amazed by the kindness of strangers that I found all season who are making the world a better place. May we all be like them. We returned to Petrie Island 10 days later to spot a skating rink where we had just been paddling. A few days after that, we went skating on the Ottawa River at Shirleys Bay, where trucks were driving on the river and people were in ice fishing huts. I wonder if they ever fall through the ice. During 2020, I was learning how to lead successful canoe trips. Over the season, someone forgot their personal flotation device, their lunch, their water, their gas, their paddle, their raincoat, their sunscreen, their bug spray, their sun hat, their winter hat, and their Kleenex. Not all on the same day, of course. If you ask me why I bring along that extra barrel full of things, you now know why. A seasoned trip leader plans, is prepared, can compromise, can change plans with the circumstances, and can laugh at the crazy things. I learned how to take photos and post trip reports. To be clear, I know nothing about photography, but I can push a button, and so can you. Learn to swim and paddle. Learn some first aid and put together a first aid kit. Get all the training and all the gear you need to be safe, and then make a plan. Find a guardian angel. Put on your personal flotation device, zipped and clipped. Then go and enjoy our land and water, Canada. This presentation would not be complete without saying, I stand on the shoulders of giants. Thanks must be extended to the RA Canoe Camping Club, Bruce Hawkins of PMH Outdoors, Lynette Chubb, Peter Kasserak, Rob Fillion, Max Finkelstein, Paul Mason, Danny Pellid of Boreal River Rescue, Jay Morrison, and Dot Bonenfant, as well as many others in Ottawa, who patiently taught me the canoe tripping skills I would need to succeed. Thanks must also be extended to Don for sharing his invaluable local route guidance. Lastly, I would not be a seasoned trip leader without the patience of Punster and all those who shared the journey. Thank you all. We've taken up hiking, skating, and cross-country skiing to keep us busy until the snow melts. New canoe routes are being explored and maps read. The bucket list is growing. I hope to see many of you out enjoying the wilderness soon.